Hey guys, and welcome to another Schematics update. This time we want to talk about Megaquarium, which is currently in development, and for that we have a special guest, Tim. Hey Tim.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. Could you introduce yourself real quick for guys out there who may not know who you are?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Tim Wicksteed. I run a studio called Twice Circled. My first game was a game called Big Pharma, which is all about running a pharmaceutical company, and we're here to talk about my latest game, which is Megaquarium, which is all about running a public aquarium.
So can I ask, what games have you been playing like in private recently?
I'm playing a bit of an oldie but a goldie. I've been playing a bit of Thero, if you guys are familiar with it. So kind of old city building game, part of the Caesar sort of series. I've also been playing a bit of Shadowhand on PC, which is actually made by a friend of mine, and that's a kind of solitaire RPG mashup. And then also a little bit of Fire Emblem. I've been a massive Fire Emblem geek for like decades, and I always pick them up a little bit late. So I think I'm playing the last but one Fire Emblem on DS. I'm not like Switch or anything. I'm still on the DS, baby.
All the games you just mentioned don't sound really like aquariums, so kind of why aquariums? I mean, do you have one yourself?
Yeah, well, no, I don't. There's like kind of two answers to this question. So like on one hand, there's the obvious one, which everyone will jump to this conclusion, right? Which is that my girlfriend used to be an aquarist, right? So she used to work as one of the people who looks after the fish in an aquarium. And we were in the car one day, and I was trying to work out what game I was going to make next. She said, "Oh, you should make one about aquariums," as a joke. I kind of just like ran with it because I actually realized that there was a lot of really cool things about aquariums that would transfer into game mechanics really well. Like, obviously, the main comparison point is like Theme Park, Roller Coaster Tycoon. These are games that have been around for a long time, and they're fantastic games. I mean, personally, Roller Coaster Tycoon, I still play it like every couple of years. I just love it. And of course, a public aquarium, it's a similar sort of thing, right? It's you're running this public attraction, you've got guests coming in, you need to keep them happy. But with this big twist, which is, what if your attractions weren't roller coasters, these static things made of metal? What if they were alive and you had to feed them and look after them and give them medicine? And it leads to loads of really interesting gameplay.
Okay, so you've already expanded on this a little bit, but what exactly is Megaquarium?
The flow of the game is you've got guests coming in, you need to keep them happy, but you've also got to design your exhibit. There's a lot of potential complexity there, because I've gone for a sort of modular sort of style with it. You get to design them from the ground up. You choose what tank you want, you choose animals you want, you choose what decorations you want, and the way that all of those things can kind of interact with each other. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of emerging complexity there. You've got to hire your staff who you're going to be managing to look after your animals, just overall try and build a bigger and better aquarium as you go along.
What kind of games would you compare Megaquarium to, and why?
Well, the Roller Coaster Tycoon count jumps up one more. But of course, it's not just that. Obviously, you got Planet Coaster, you got like all the ones that have come more recently. So that's like the main point of inspiration. But that doesn't mean like I'm not trying to evolve the genre. There are some stuff that I don't think have been kind of done before in these sorts of games. So like, for example, I'm trying to take some of the awesome resource management out of games like Civ and put them into this sort of genre, into the public attraction management genre, because I don't think it's something that people do very much. I think often you don't have that kind of resource management interplay in the same way. There's also a bit of Dwarf Fortress in there too, and obviously all the kind of derivative games that have come from there. In terms of this idea of like you have staff that you need to manage, they're semi-autonomous, and so rather than like in a real-time strategy game where you're telling them individually what to do, it's more like you set their priorities and you set their roles, and then they do it on their own. And I really love that sort of gameplay because it's macro intensive rather than micro intensive. And once you get it set up, you just get to sit back and watch your ants run around doing your bidding.
Okay, so this is a little bit more of a technical question, but how do you design the UI for your games, and what do you focus on?
To be honest, UI takes up a lot of my time, and you might get this a lot, I don't know, talking to devs of strategy games and simulation games, just because it's so important, and that's because there's so much information the player needs to know to play this sort of game. And so there's kind of like two sides to it. The way I approach it is like two sides, which, number one is like you need to make sure that all the information is there and handy, and if the player wants to know something specific, they can find it, right? And that's that's the starting place. So one of the main tools I use for that is I've got like a window-based system. Like there's a reason why we use it in operating systems. Like windows are really handy. You can bring them up, you can move them around the screen, you can have like two up at the same time. So if you want to like cross-reference information from between one filter and one animal, and kind of say, oh well, this needs this amount of filtering, and so you know what I mean, you can kind of like cross-reference between them. That's really handy, but the problem with that on its own is you're still forcing the player to go and dig down for stuff all the time, and sometimes the player doesn't know what they want to know. So you've also got to kind of have a way of like putting stuff up in front of the player and saying, hey, you got something to do here, that something is wrong. That can be really tough too, because if you fill the screen with these sorts of, sorry to sound a bit like marketing, but like call to actions, right? So something that's popping up and telling you've got to work on something. If you fill the screen with that stuff, then they can't see the rest of it, and you can't see all the beautiful art and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's tough, and it's a massive part of it, but it's something that I'm constantly trying to improve on, something that I'm always working in. Like when I see something I don't like, I rip it out and I do it again.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about maps. So you have map size, of course. And what I have seen from your game, it's not a static map, but you can expand it over time. So why did you choose to go this route and not the fixed map size?
See, I mean, partly it's the way I program. It seems kind of elegant to me to, instead of having like a fixed, like the way most people like will store the data in their model will be like a two-dimensional array, right, covering the entire map, and stuff places down on that. And so it's just my style is like, instead of having an array with like a fixed size, I just kind of I just make it so everything can stretch. So as you build in one direction, it will just keep on expanding the data model that runs underneath the game, so that you can keep going. And because of my art style, is that you've probably noticed, because I did the same in Big Pharma, if you're familiar with that game, it's like I always have these like floating islands. It's just the art style I like, and because of that, there's no real reason why you can't just build forever in any direction. So it didn't really come from like any specific design decision. It was just like the way I started to do stuff. But what I quite like about this is it's quite unique. It's, in most games you have this kind of decision right at the beginning of the game, which is like, where do I start building? Knowing that if you go too far in one direction, you'll eventually come up to like a wall. But with this, you can just expand in any direction you want, and then if you want to expand in the other direction, you can. So you can make like a really lopsided one. It means that if you wanted to, halfway through the game, you can kind of decide, oh no, this is actually going to be the corner of my aquarium rather than the center of it. But having said all that, I do quite like the idea of maybe having some constraints in certain levels, like outside of the skirmish or sandboxy sort of mode that I have envisioned. I like the idea of like if it's like a campaign level, then maybe having like a fixed floor plan that you're only allowed to expand into. Like you're buying up bits of a building, and once you've bought the entire building, that's it. Because I think that could create some interesting gameplay. Kind of how much can you squeeze into a certain sized building?
When you're actually laying out your aquarium, you've got a variety of different sizes of, well, I guess glass boxes that are your aquariums. So are they just different shapes because you need to place them in different spots, or are they like, is it just a visual difference, or do the specific aquariums work differently mechanically?
This is basically an area of the game which is underdeveloped at the moment. There's kind of two main types of tank. You've got the ones which they don't have as high capacity, but they can be accessed from all sides, and they can be viewed from all sides. And then you've got these wall ones, which the idea is you build them into the wall, they're only accessed from the back. It's like your standard aquarium in a public aquarium tank. And these have got slightly higher capacity, but they're a little bit trickier to design around. Anyway, I want to go so much further beyond that. I mean, to start with, there's all the kind of cool, quirky tanks that you see when you go and visit like these awesome aquariums around the world. You've got things like concave walls that bow into the tank so that guests can kind of stick their head in and look left and right. So that can give some extra kind of like fun bonus, like guests can like find those especially enjoyable. You can have opposite ones that bow out, and then you've got like tunnels. I've got ideas for kind of gangways, so that maybe you've got like a really big tank comes with like a gangway on one side, which can actually go over the top of a single height tank, right? So you can create more interesting layouts by unlocking these different types of tank. You've got, for your really big tanks with like shark tanks, you need to have a really high dissolved oxygen level for those sorts of tanks. And so you could actually have like a tank that you unlock which has pumps that blow the water in at loads of different areas and circulate the water. So you've got higher dissolved oxygen level in the tank, which will then help you for certain types of fish. So there's a kind of like two sides to it. There's like the guest side, but there's also, you know, we could build in equipment into the tanks themselves. So I'm foreseeing like 20 different types of tank, and that's not including sizes. That's just like you can then drag those out to be different sizes.
I mean, layouts itself are sort of like puzzles, right? And I wonder, how much do you think of these puzzles when you're designing your games?
I don't design specific puzzles into games as I make them. You know, I prefer optimizing stuff when there's no perfect solution, like when I'm playing a game, because otherwise you get into that like analysis paralysis where if you can't find that optimal solution that you know exists, you just won't progress. So I kind of like that you don't really know whether you've got it exactly right. And the way I kind of go about that, you know, I start off with a load of building blocks that the player has available to them, and then you set a goal. You know, it's up to them just to optimize as well as they can to get that. And it's I mean, and the way you kind of get, like, I think the really interesting puzzles, the really interesting decisions is it's just to have loads of different diverging resources. So, like, you've got obviously money, you've got different resource types, you've got things like you've got things like optimal staff routing, optimal guest flow. You've got like the skills of your staff, like how much, like as they gain experience and level up. You've got your guest rating. You've got all these different things that you can kind of optimize for. And in nearly every decision, you're going to be probably favoring one over another. And so, like I say, there's never going to be this kind of perfect solution. And, you know, hopefully it's going to be one of these sorts of games where you can, you know, keep playing the same level and just try like a slightly different start. Go, oh, what if I do it like this at the beginning? Which will lead on to having slightly more of X, which means you can then get access to Y, and it just, you know what I mean? This kind of branching story, which means that it's different every time you play.
So you mentioned multiple resources. I've got a question about currencies. Why did you decide to go with a multiple currency system instead of, you know, just your standard money?
It was always one of the things in my first game, Big Pharma, which I felt limited it a little bit. It just has the one currency, and so even though there's quite a lot of complexity in that game, you're always optimizing for the same thing, and I think that kind of decreases the I'm going to make up sound really pretentious, like the puzzle space, you know, like we were talking about in the last question. Like it decreases all the different options, because eventually, because you're only optimizing for this one resource, it's like if you work out how to make the most money, well, there we go. That's probably the right way to go. But with this one, because you've got these different things that feed into each other, I think it's getting away from that idea of like that perfect solution. It makes that ability for like almost like infinite levels of optimization possible. And to a certain extent, you know, I'm inspired by games like Civilization, and I love how you've got all these different currencies that feed into one another. You know, so when you've got like lots of production, you know, you want to get some culture, you can like build a certain building which gives you the culture, and, you know, vice versa. If you've got loads of money, you can spend that on you could buy a certain structure which boosts something else. And I've always just really enjoyed that in games.
So how do the different currencies work, and what do you use them for? Okay,
so in Megaquarium you have 4 different currencies, and each of them works a bit differently. You've got money, obviously. It's what you're constantly spending and constantly gaining. So you use it to buy like all the things that you place down, like tanks and fish and equipment, but it's also used for consumable things like salaries and fish food. And you earn it from like ticket sales and the sale of items in your aquarium. And it's kind of like, it's like the moving average one. It's like you obviously always wanting to make like a profit each day, and then it kind of accumulates into a bank. And then you've got the next 2 are ecology and science points. Now these are earned by your guests viewing your tanks and other attractions. The amount you get is basically calculated from the combined value of all of the animals in the attraction, in the tank, plus any bonuses from like comboing two things together. Like, for example, if you've got like a clownfish with an enemy, you might get some bonus ecology points. Anyway, so you use ecology points to unlock new animals and decorations, and you use science points to unlock new equipment and auxiliary items. And it's your animals and your decorations which earn you the points, but the stuff you unlock with the science points will make it easier and cheaper to look after them. So like you might be able to unlock a special pump which doesn't get clogged as often, or even like a self-cleaning pump, or some tools for your staff which make feeding quicker or allow them to hold more food so they don't have to make as many trips to the food bins. Sorry, the final one that I didn't mention was prestige points. Now this one is still a little bit in flux, haven't fully designed it yet, but the idea is they're meant to be the hardest to acquire. Maybe you acquire them using by completing like submissions or something like that within a single level. And then the idea is you reach a certain cap and then you get to choose an exclusive one-off upgrade, and it will be like pick one of these three things and then the other two are just gone forever. You can't get them during that same level. And the idea with these is that because they're exclusive, they'll have like a big impact on what your strategy is going to be like. It will provide you a real incentive to play in a certain type of way. I actually can't think of examples right now. Maybe one of the upgrades will make it really efficient to have lots and lots of big animals, whereas another one might make it more efficient to have lots of small animals. Something like that.
All right, so let's talk about difficulty. What makes the game challenging, and what's gonna keep me playing for tens of hundreds of hours?
It's one of those games that definitely starts off slow and then just kind of exponentially gets more complicated, and it gets out of control pretty fast in my experience. One of the problems is, right, you're incentivized to go quite big, right? It's like from the very first decision you make, you can kind of do you want to fill your first two tanks with your first fish, or do you just want to kind of take it slow and build a couple of them? And then it's like as soon as you get enough points to unlock another one, you're like, well, I'm going to build that one. But as you go bigger and bigger, as you get more fish and more tanks, the staff jobs really start to mount up. So you've got if you just got lots of fish, you've got your staff having to go back and make multiple trips to the same bin, right? That's okay. That's your first level. Okay, it's you might need an extra staff person. It's not too bad. But then when you start to get different types of fish, you now have different food types. So now they have to either make an extra trip for a different food type, which can be really inefficient if you just got the one animal that eats it, or you have to hire another staff member and maybe you make them deal with all the other different types of food. And there's also hopefully you guys are already thinking oh, I could optimize that. If I put fish that eat the same thing together, bam, you've saved yourself some trips. But that's just the start of it, 20 different food types, and then you've got all the different equipment which need maintaining. And then what I think is fun is it's not just that the requirements put on your staff is going to keep going up. It's more the strategic decisions are going to be more and more complicated. Where are you going to spend those science points? Are you going to unlock the thing that makes your filters clean themselves? Or are you going to go for, like I said earlier, the food bags that allow your guys to carry more food? Because I actually think that's the interesting bit. It's the strategic decisions you make to combat all of the mounting requirements put on you. And then the other side of the challenge is going to be layout. So there's loads of stuff that your staff need to have access to, like the pumps and the other types of equipment, and these can get in the way all of your your feeding routes and that sort of stuff. So it's definitely not the problem isn't easily solved. It's one of these ones where I'm still trying to find what the perfect solution is to the layout, and I don't know if there is one,
In the gameplay videos we saw staff areas. So I kind of wonder why using staff areas and how do they impact the game?
I mean, to be honest, it really came from that I was trying to I wanted like a good looking aquarium, and I wanted your aquariums to look like real life aquariums. So where you have staff generally behind the scenes, and then you have the guests out the front. Then the real question is how do I incentivize the player to do that? So, for example, it's not actually in the game yet, but I keep talking about doing it. What I'm going to do is make it so that once you reach a certain level of aquarium, kind of like you have this thing as guest rating, which keeps going up. And once you reach a certain level, you'll start to get a negative modifier on that guest rating if your guests see too much of your like aquarium innards, like filters and food bins and all of that sort of stuff. And so you're incentivized to put it behind closed doors. You've got your guest flow, and then you've got your staff routing, if you like. And they're often competing with each other, right? So you want guests to walk straight from one tank to the next, stopping every now and again to take care of one of their needs, like thirst, hunger, or their bladder. And you don't want them to be kind of wasting time walking around stuff that isn't one of those things. So it's quite useful to keep those things separate. And I love how this has come about. Like I guess this has come about just from me designing the game based on a real life thing.
Do you have any plans for future mod support?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually another area where, compared to my last game, I wanted to improve. I had mod support, okay mod support in Big Pharma. Let's say below average mod support, and I definitely want to improve that this time. So what's going to help that? First, I'm going to have Steam Workshop this time around, which I didn't before. It's so much of the game is out exposed via easily editable JSON. So you've got these data files which don't just input numbers, they actually kind of put together the objects in the game. Let me give you an example. So you've got like a food bin, and it has like this JSON object. So it's kind of plain text. If you guys aren't familiar with JSON, it's JavaScript object notation. Go look it up. And you can basically assign it different behaviors. So like a food bin, for example, is an item container. So that means it contains items, and you can say like what its capacity is. But you can also say that it's an immobile object, which is something that you can place down, and you give it a cost and all these different things. And actually, it's quite easy to like put these behaviors together in different combinations to create brand new objects. And also, one of the things that's quite cool about this game is I've written my own FBX importer, 3D model importer. So the game will read FBX files straight off the disk at runtime, which is quite rare for a Unity game, because if most people use the inbuilt Unity software to do that, and it doesn't do runtime. So you have to build your 3D objects in advance, and it makes modding the game much harder. So yeah, it's the idea is for it to be very, very moddable.
What platforms will the game be on?
Sure. So the easy question answer is just PC, Mac, Linux. I'm definitely like a PC first guy, and I think about that. Like the most important thing is I want it to be just really, really good on PC. That's where I think my main audience is. I would love to do a Switch port. I probably won't do mobile, because I just think if I did just put out an exact version of it on mobile, there would be a lot of challenges in like performance and UI and stuff like that. Like I think it would be really, really hard, and also difficult to charge lots of money on mobile anyway. Whereas on Switch, I think a lot of those issues are actually taken away. Number one, Switch is a much more powerful device. Number two, it's people are used to paying normal kind of premium pay up front prices for games on Switch. So those issues aren't there. What it really comes down to is UI design and making it work with the controller. So I would love to do it. I have talked to Nintendo and, proceed along this route if I want to, but I haven't decided yet. And I think what I really need to do first is see if I can get the game running on a PC with a controller. And if so, I probably can make the move.
What's the future of Megaquarium? Where can people find you and your work?
Sure. So the future of Megaquarium is the game is hopefully going to be released in July or August 2018 this year. Fingers crossed. And you can wishlist it already on Steam. So if you are interested, I really suggest you do that. It's, get a reminder when a game comes out if you don't want like lots and lots of updates on it. On the other hand, if you want lots and lots of updates, then subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just search for Megaquarium video blog. I do a weekly blog where I talk about the design of the game, and I take on feedback, and I'm always happy to hear feedback. A lot of stuff that gets suggested does work its way back into the game, so yeah, it's really valuable for me. And I'm at Twice Circled on Twitter.
So that's about it for today. Tim, thanks again for joining us and talking with us about Megaquarium. And for our listeners and viewers out there, thanks for listening and viewing. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, feel free to use our wonderful comment section under the video. See you next time.